Welcome to today's Orchestrator week. I wish everyone a happy new year. Hope for a great 2022. And let's have a look at the agenda for today. And we have 3 agenda items. First, we have the CPU limit. That was a topic that came up end of last year somewhere. There was a feature request that we finally implement a CPU limit per service. And question is what we want to do about it, and then how do we want to implement. So first, our idea was to just implement a global flag for limiting the CPUs globally, but that probably is not going to work. So we have to implement it per service or per daemon. I don't know. Any thoughts? John, you're agreeing.
Well, yeah, I don't think doing it globally will work because different services will want different amounts of resources. I mean, I think Mons are going to need less than OSDs on average, right? So I assume it would be per service for both CPU and memory.
But we can agree that we are not going to use different CPU limits per different daemons, right?
Well, per daemon type.
Yeah, but not per individual daemon.
Right, not per individual daemon. So you're not going to have like OSD1 versus OSD2 with different CPU limits, but I would think you would set it. I would think you would set it for all OSDs. I mean, unless you want to even go further and have OSD types.
Yeah.
But saying for all daemons, for all containers of type Ceph, the CPU limit is X is too broad. I don't think the feature would be very useful if it did it for all Ceph daemons.
No, that's a bummer. Adam, you already made a draft PR last year somewhere?
It's not a draft prior, it's just commit. I can go find it though. But that was it did something similar. It actually did, I guess, more than what we would need. Because it allowed any arguments to be passed, or any like container arguments to be passed for for a service. When you deploy the containers, it would use those arguments. So you could use that to limit the CPUs by like I think it's like just dash dash CPUs, whatever, for the service. It would work. But if you want to only allow a specific flag, that one's too broad because it allows you to do any container arguments. Anything that Podman allows, you could do basically there. But it would be trivial to like either limit it to only allowing certain flags or to just, if you wanted to have it just be a specific flag, and only allow them to set one, you could like hard code all that stuff in, but you'd be changing a lot of the same spots at least as that commit.
To some degree, I like that as extra container args. On the other hand, I dislike it, and I'm not. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, having that extra container arg thing is super flexible, but it's opening a door to all sorts of weird, undefined behavior. If someone creates conflicts to existing managed arguments.
Yeah, it sounded like a catch-all, but a maybe dangerous catch-all.
I don't know. Really, I don't know what's the best option here. I think whatever we do, we're going to have a good implementation. We hard code it for that specific use case, and we can do proper argument checking and so on. If we are having that extra container thing per service, then it's going to be super flexible, but less user friendly. And yeah,
I assume there was a bug that came from this for this feature.
downstream got escalated in downstream, so we have to properly look into it in upstream as well.
Is the sorry, I don't know if you have the bug handy. You can check it out later.
No, let's no, I don't have it handy. Mike, any thoughts?
I think I'm not totally familiar with the issue downstream, so it's hard for me to comment. One thing on the complexity, instead of doing this per item, can we do like a generalized thing? You know, kind of the way we did the container images. You can have both the simplicity of that, and then if you need the complexity, layer that in.
I don't think that we have a particular need to have it super user friendly. Going to be more of an edge case than a user. Podman has a few CPU limit flags. Podman CPU limit. I think how is it? A half a dozen different CPU limit flags. CPU period, CPU quota, CPU RT period, CPU RT runtime, CPU shares, CPUs equals numbers, CPU set mems.
Can you do me a favor? I mean, what would be the typical use case that you envision? I mean, from an OpenStack perspective or any particular, environment, what are you looking to do just to make sure you do have the right implementation moving forward?
I think that really depends on what the user envisions.
So OpenStack, what do you think, John, you would be using this for? What kind of situations? Is it more of a day two operation tuning when you find problems? Is it more day one setup? Is it, where do you see this going?
So I didn't see the original bug that this was open for, but my comment had to do with people wanting to in hyper-converged scenarios where you're co-locating Ceph with other services, and maybe you're concerned about limiting the amount of CPU Ceph can have so that other services could have that. So I don't know if the downstream bug was that. The biggest offender in those scenarios was OSD memory consumption, and we have a separate OSD memory parameter, the auto-tune memory, which is linked on, I think it's the last item of this agenda. So when I heard about this, that's what it made me think of, and that's why I thought, well, doing it for all Ceph containers probably wouldn't be as useful. If this addresses it for this downstream bug, doing it in general for all Ceph containers, then that's good. I don't want to propose blocking that Adam's patch, just because it doesn't do it on a per container basis. But that was my initial reaction was, oh, if you're going to do this, don't you want to do it per service? Wouldn't that be much more useful in order to tune the system?
But getting back to Mike's comments, which, something like, if you want to small, medium, and large config, like, and run it these different ways. Is that good enough? I mean, from the Ceph, deployment perspective. I mean, so that's where I guess I'm just trying to. I still have a hard time with myself trying to figure out what we're trying to do here and what we're trying to accomplish. And yeah, making it a general purpose Swiss Army knife is going to be, I think, a difficult implementation to get right. And I'm not sure you really need that either. I sort of agree with Mike on this one.
I didn't see the downstream bug.
I do have the downstream bug here. I could copy the relevant part into the other pad.
Yeah, please, Adam.
I guess that's going into the Etherpad.
Yeah. Oh, you want it in the chat?
Yep. No, the Etherpad is good.
Etherpad's in the Etherpad.
Yeah, Etherpad is good.
I don't want to link the whole bug, obviously. There's some
No.
downstream stuff, but that's the relevant part there. What they wanted to do.
I need to configure the limit of CPU and memory resource for each the OST service individually. We need to set them per Ceph service because they are never the same for MDS or GW months. Important for co-locating Ceph services on the same node so we can slice up the resource of a node and we are confident that one service doesn't need resource from the other service and affect their performance.
That's usually where I see this request, but I'm coming into this thing sideways. I don't know what the bug was that the customer was asking for.
I wouldn't always assume that the customer knows what you want.
That's why I wanted to see the bug.
Just to comment one thing, okay? Because I think that probably the implementation and the way that we are following probably is going to be very complicated for final use. I don't know if there is a suggestion about that, but I think that the way to do in order to limit, to set any kind of limit for CPU, for any kind of resource, for memory, is to set this attribute in the service specification. I think that to have exactly the same limits for the same kind of service is not very realistic, okay? Because, for example, what John has explained, maybe we need a different limits for different type of OSD devices. So what I think that the right way to do, I suggest to introduce these attributes, simple attributes, for example, mem limit and CPU limit in the first attempt. Introduce these attributes in the service specifications, and then apply these limits only to the containers that are deployed for this specification. In this way, we can have different OSTs types with different limits, different, for example, RDW diamonds with different limits. So I think that this is the way to implement. And I think that also is very important to make very easy to work with this limit. And I think that if we introduce the attribute in the service specification, it's going to be very easy for everybody to understand what is going to happen.
Well, the patch that I posted in the chat earlier, that one does sort of roughly that, but it's more generic. It would have to be slimmed down to only allow CPU related stuff.
I'm looking.
I didn't put it in the other pad. I put it in the chat.
Right.
But that's per service. You can essentially allows you to put any container arguments on all the daemons deployed for that service.
Right. So I could pass a different CPU number to OSDs than I could with Mons using your patch here.
Yeah. I had a sample.
So it sounds like your patch would do that. So that's good.
I think this was a sample. The spacing got messed up on that post, but that's like how one you could do it. So like I have like the extra container args there on the Mon service, and you just apply that spec, and you would put the CPU quota on there. But all the spacing got messed up when I pasted that. Get the idea.
Adam, like so? Is it right here?
I mean, I have it on like the next line. I don't remember how much of a difference it makes the formatting and stuff. I know it's not one string though. It's like I have it as a dictionary right now. You do like CPU quota colon, and then like I guess CPUs colon and 2, like that.
Oh,
Yeah, something like that.
yeah, that's really the question of how we want to implement it. Mike, I guess you are you would prefer option number 2, right? This one here, but just having a config entry or config key entry, and then we just make use of it. Like so, Mike?
The more we've been discussing this, I think like Wanmi's comments about per service in this description, that makes a lot of sense because each service would want to treat this differently. So I'm not sure if a global option is relevant. But I do have fears, like if we did this per daemon, this is kind of risky because, like, let's say the cluster's imbalanced and they do something extreme on a single OSD. I don't like the idea of that either. So maybe we dissuade that.
We could make it per, even if we make it a global option, config set.
Yeah, kind of similar to container images, right?
Yeah, exactly. If we just say CPUs, and then we can say either we set it globally, or we set it per service, or we set it per daemon.
That's identical to the memory limit is set up right now. Exactly how that one works.
That's super flexible.
Whichever approach we do, I think memory and CPU settings should be done the same way. Like, that would kind of make sense.
That sounds like alternative too.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have one of these for generic memory? I thought it was only the OSD target memory that we were talking about, which linked later in the agenda.
It might only be for OSD daemons actually, but it works a similar way where you can set it for individual. Actually, can you set it for service with the config option? Is that even possible?
What's the memory target?
You can set it for host, I think. You can say like I want all the OSDs on this host to have this memory. But I don't think it's like a per full service because I don't think the config options know what services are.
Yeah, and that's an OSD. I'm talking about OSD memory target auto-tune and auto-tune target memory ratio, which are safer because it's done in a ratio versus. But either way, the interface. I assume you're saying it should have the same interface as that setting, which is what alternative 2 is providing, right?
Yeah, because under the hood, when you turn the auto tune stuff on, it just modifies a bunch of these ones that kind of look like the like line 62 there, like the set OSD whatever. It's like memory limit,
Oh, I see.
and it just goes and it modifies like per host. That's like the config option, and all the OSDs get set up so they use it.
We already have OSD NUMA node. In the config in the osd.yaml.in file as a global config option. So it seems that we are indeed talking about a new global config option, right? If I'm not mistaken.
We want it to be applicable to like all the different types of services and stuff. I think it has to go.
Especially if we want to be at least somewhat consistent with the memory configurations. If we don't care about consistency, then we can do it whatever we want to do. But if we actually do care about it, then we should probably make it a config option.
Consistency is important to me. So that would be my goal.
So alternative 2A is it then?
It seems better to me.
Okay, let's do it. Except if we have any other opinions. For me, are you okay with it?
I don't like, but go ahead with that. I think that is something that is not related at all with the services and the way that we manage services in FADM. But okay, let's go with that. For me, the way to do is, well, the thing that Adam has implemented is almost what we need, okay? I think that the only problem with alternative 3 is that you can specify a set of parameters, a set of extra container args that probably can damage the, well, that can raise problems, okay? Because, well, we are opening a bug where the user can introduce any kind of thing. So this is problematic. So yes, go ahead.
Yes, indeed, the user can set these numbers wrong, regardless of which interface we use, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, because, I mean, what you're saying, Wanmi, is not, we're going to do alternative 1 versus alternative 3. All the alternatives give the user a way to shoot themselves. I just think it's a different type of argument.
Yes, but well,
or maybe I'm not understanding, so that's why I'm asking for the clarification.
Yes, well, I think that in first place we need to do the things in a simple way, and we need to reduce the possibilities of problems. Okay, and I think that if we well, we reduce that you can set the CPU limits, and with this parameter, exactly with this parameter, we can check what are the limits and what are the, well, we can verify if everything is correct or not, okay? And I think that, well, to set this parameter using alternative 3 or alternative 1 into the spec of the service is a very good idea, because it's completely online in the same way that we are doing things with services in Ceph EDM. The alternative too, well, is the way that we have for other things in Ceph, okay? But I think that it's just to put something in a big bag, okay? And you need to make things simple. It's difficult, okay? Because, well, you can assign a CPU limit for all the OSDs or only for certain OSDs, but you cannot set the OSD limits for one type of OSD or OSDs that has deployed in certain hosts. So it's more rigid, okay? The way to, well, the alternative 3, okay, just introducing the limits, the verification that we are using the right parameters, I think that it could be correct, okay? Alternative 3 and alternative 1 is more or less the same, but in alternative 1 we are reducing the possibilities of errors, okay? So this is my view. And I don't like the alternative 2, okay? I think that is to put more things in the Ceph config, and we have thousands of them, and I don't like.
So for alternative 2, it would start with container limit until they ask for something else, and then this multiplies, versus just having extra args where you just do a pass through of all the podman stuff.
Yeah.
Alternative 3 is certainly simpler to implement.
Yeah.
The only difference between alternative 1 and 3 is almost we have to just change the name around, and we just have to limit which parameters they pass. It's really just like a trivial modification.
Yes, it's a small modification, and just in order to make it more safe, okay? Because in extra containers args, you can put everything, okay? So I think that limiting what are the final user options is better. But it's the same that you have implemented, Adam. It's just to reduce the possibility.
I see. So we are talking about the interface. We agree the user could always set the wrong number here, but by giving them this power, we are assuming they want that power. They're asking for it. They choose to use this. But I can see your argument against 2A. While it is consistent with Ceph's interface, are you going to take every single parameter that's linked in the Docker documentation and make it a Ceph config?
Yeah.
Harder to just bypass that. I'm liking alternative 3 more. So Juan Mi has persuaded me.
He did. Okay. Then it's alternative 3. I think whatever we do.
For me, it's
better. I think whatever we do, we have to trade, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, on the one hand, we are less conforming to how Ceph is doing things. On the other hand, we are going to be more independent and probably more consistent to Ceph ADM itself, right?
Yeah.
And then people already have asked for extra container args in the rest of the in the rest of the different server specifications. So actually, yes. Okay, let's go with extra container args then. Fine with me. NFA testing. That's the next topic on that list. I don't know when that came up. think that came up with Adam with your agent-related
And I think it was with the PR that actually rescheduled the offline NFS demons, like the recent
y-
one.
yeah. What do you think? Can we make it so that the host is seen as offline by forcing a new address? And then this way we are going to be able to fail over?
Yeah, if we could just cause a connection failure and we shut the agent down first, assuming there's an agent running, then it would think it's offline. I think that would work.
Okay. Is that something we really have to implement once things are properly done and implemented? We shouldn't forget it because if we don't, it's going to break. And if we continue implementing new features, we are going to be prone to these kind of regressions, and that would be super awful. And the third thing is the last pull request, OSD memory target for Bootstrap. Um, the main problem I'm really scared about is that we are by defaulting to to have a OSD memory target autotune ratio of 0.7. We are going to make it harder for people using HCI environments because by default it's going to be incompatible to HCI environments, and I don't feel super comfortable. I don't feel super comfortable with the PR as it is because we are just going to make to break HCI environments by default. But I don't have any other good idea of how to do that. Of how to properly have an OSD memory target properly set up for everyone else, because for non-HCI environments, we really do not. We really have to enable the OSD memory target auto-tuning. So just not enabling it also not a good option. What can we do? Any thoughts?
Sebastian, what is the rationale under these things? This
So
is a
the
request.
problem is, okay, the problem is, if we do not enable OSD memory auto-tuning, we are breaking new normal installations. Because Ceph is designed to make use of all available memory. And if we don't, then we are going to create wrongly configured those Ceph clusters by default. And we really do not want to create, we don't want to create a broken Ceph clusters by default.
So every Ceph cluster that hasn't had auto-tune has been misconfigured?
Yes.
Ever since the first Ceph cluster and so on. Like
Yes.
auto-tune is new, but I mean, in theory, someone could run out of memory versus we could give them this feature to protect them from doing that more gracefully than getting OOM'd. Right?
OSD memory tuning is there in Ceph Ansible already, so it's not something completely new.
Well, okay. I mean, in earlier versions of Ceph, it wasn't there, but I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor that point.
But yeah, essentially, yes. If we do not enable OSD memory auto-tuning, then the cluster itself is broken because it doesn't make use of the hardware, which means it's reduced in performance by default. And why should we reduce the cluster by default in performance if we can just fix it by enabling auto-tuning?
Sounds good. Let's use this new feature. But then you're worried that by defaulting it to 70%, that's not good for HCI. So
exactly.
So people who read the HCI documentation observe that we tell them to set it to a lower percentage.
No one is reading the documentation. Oh, really? No one is reading the documentation except if something goes wrong. So people would definitely figure out that something is going wrong with their HCI environments because OSDs are taking too much memory. Obviously. So we can just say, yeah, let's go that route. Let's go. Let's misconfigure OSD memory targets for HCI environments. And let administrators figure out something is odd with their OSD memory usage. And then they will figure out themselves that they have to set up the OSD memory target auto-tune ratio properly to order 3 or so. So it's a route that we can take. I just don't feel super confident about it. But I don't have a better answer.
I think Ceph Ansible did the equivalent thing though. It had its own setting. It basically had a Boolean called is HCI, and it defaults to false because you assume most normal deployments are not HCI. And if someone was deploying HCI, to set that Boolean to true, and then it had a different percentage for the OSD memory target, and therefore you could have by doing this, you're having the equivalent of it.
Yeah, but no one is going to set that particular weird option if you don't know it exists.
Right. I would think someone who was deploying HCI would. I mean, either you're going to detect that they're using HCI somehow and set it, or you're going to forgo the feature.
How? Please.
Difficultly. It's too. I think it's too complicated to do that. I mean, I would think if I'm deploying HCI that I would. I'm not actually literally proposing that, Sebastian. I just don't see any way that and that unless the user explicitly configures it for HCI, that you're going to get the right thing. I think it's too complicated to try to detect that.
Could we assume based on the back end, like whether it's Rook or Ceph ADM, just as a general rule?
We need it for both.
For both. No.
Yeah. Ceph ADM is also used in HCI environments and in non-HCI environments.
Right. So there's OpenStack HCI and non-HCI, and then there's non-OpenStack. But
yeah,
I've
seen Kubernetes co-located with Ceph ADM, so.
I don't see what you can do. I mean, I think set it to this, enable the new feature by default for everyone, and the subset of people who choose to use HCI should see the documentation. I mean,
blog post? Can we write a blog post of how to?
Well, it's already documented. What you're doing doesn't contradict I mean, if you want to talk about what OpenStack or OOO is doing specifically for this, there's an example in our documentation. I'll share it with you. And I'll put it in the Etherpad too. And this is the triple O answer, where we pretty much explain to them that they need to set the auto tune.
Can we just reference this documentation?
Sure. I would, I would think if, or at least if I were a triple O user and I wanted to deploy it in HCI, then I would probably say, okay, how do I do that? And I would read the triple O documentation on how to do it.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, sounds fair to me. Fair enough. Okay. Melissa, is that okay for you?
Yeah, I can like reference. Wait, do we want to reference that link? The triple O one?
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, the triple O documentation really specifies how to deploy hyperconverged Ceph in a triple O environment. So we can reference this as an example of how to set it, because we probably do not want to encourage users to manually set that autotune memory target ratio to 0.2. If we can just reference this document how to set it in the proper triple O way, right? We could properly reference the triple O documentation or maybe the aquarium documentation if we want to support hyperconverged in aquarium. I don't know, Mike. Yeah, let's reference it. I would say in the Insta documentation for Cephirium.
Okay.
yeah, I would think you could state the general, just like we have memory auto tuning and set it appropriately. Here's one instance of setting it to a particular number. But before you reference it, you'd probably point out that the memory auto tune can be set accordingly.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Anything else for today? Have a great week. And see you next week.
Bye.
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 Bye.